Greetings of peace. My name is Imhotep, broadcasting on behalf of 13signsastrology.com. That's the number 13, signs plural, astrology.com. I'm doing this video pertaining to several inquiries that I get on the sovereignty movement and pertaining to the legal situation here in the United States. Now, I want to first say, before I go into this information, that many people are under the impression that when I'm making these videos that I'm getting off track of talking about astrology, but in truth, the astrology covers many things, as I talked about in the natal reading video that I did. And there is an aspect in astrology that deals with the law. And believe it or not, astrology is the highest law. It's universal law in practice. And when you deal with astrology, you are dealing with universal law. You're dealing with the higher laws, the laws that govern the universe. The laws that govern the universe are the only really true laws that matter, because as long as you're in tune with universal law, then you are in tune with all law. See, this is where they got Allah from. They got Allah from all law. And I'll go into that in another video, but just wanted to go ahead and just make mention of that. Now, many people are not aware, cognizant, and conscious of the fact that when you go to court, when you sign documents, when you deal with corporations and entities that you call government, you are not looked at as a flesh and blood being or individual. You're not looked at as a flesh and blood being or individual. And this is the mistake that people make when they deal with politics, when they deal with the voting process and many other processes, is the fact that over the years, and it's a long process, this government has been transformed and transferred over to a private corporation. So when the United States of America was first formed, it was formed as a republic. It was reformed as a republic form of government, whereas the people held the power, and the power was in the people, and the people were looked at as sovereigns. But because you've lost your constitutional rights, you've lost your God-given rights, and have bartered them over and traded them for corporate status. So now when you deal with government, you're dealing with a corporation. That's right, a private corporation. When you deal with the IRS, this is a private corporation. Believe it or not, there's over 7 different IRSs across the United States of America. Seven different corporations. These are called non-governmental entities, NGOs. And they are not. They're non-profit organizations, believe it or not. Or not-for-profit organizations. They are not government entities. When you deal with law enforcement on different levels, CIA, FBI, even your local police officers are not part of the government. These are private corporations that many people do not realize that they're dealing with the private entity, and they come at these people, or when they're addressed by these entities, not even these people, excuse me, when they're addressed by these private entities, flesh and blood individuals come at them and come back at them as a flesh and blood entity, thinking that they're going to respond to you as a flesh and blood entity, whereas they are not obligated to respond to you as a flesh and blood entity, because what they do, and when they respond to you, they are responding to you based on the fact that you have consented at some point into being a corporation, and they respond to you as a corporation. You pull out your driver's license. This is according to law. Now, before I go into that, let me make one more point. These entities, when they address you, whether it's even in courts, the courts deal with something called maritime admiralty law. Maritime admiralty law is dealing with the laws of commerce, the laws of military. This has nothing to do with the law of the land. There are different aspects of the law. This has nothing to do with the law of the land. And you, as a flesh and blood entity, you came from Mother Earth. You are a part of the land as a flesh and blood entity. But when you go and you go to courts, when you go to these non-governmental entities and you go to these courts, you are looked at as a corporation. And you are treated as such. And I want you to really think about that. You are a corporation to these people. Or to these, I keep calling them people, excuse me. To these entities. These fictions. You are a corporation. And they address you as that. So when you go into courts, when you deal with any forms of contracts, when you sign off on documents, on leases for apartments, all of these things, you are a corporation contracting with another corporation, because according to the Uniform Commercial Codes, called the UCC codes, this is what governs the land. This is what governs commerce. The UCC codes, the Uniform Commercial Codes, and the only parties that can take place and take part in the UCCs are corporations. So this is how they tricked you and bamboozled you based on a long process of how it got to this point. But they tricked you into becoming a corporation, and they use a language called legalese. See, it's a different language when you deal with contracts, courts, law enforcement. All of these entities, they deal in a system called legalese. And they use legalese to gain jurisdiction over you, to convert you over from a flesh and blood being into a corporation, to convert you over from a living soul into a corporation. And this is something that must be understood and overstood if you are to want to get into the concept of sovereignty and gaining back your freedom and your independence, because corporations rule today. Corporations rule the world, not governments. Nationality is no longer the order of the day according to the world stage. It is now corporations. You see, nobody's dealing on a national level anymore. They're dealing on a corporate level through the color of the law. It's called the color of the law. This is why when you fill out an application, they ask you for your race, which you interpret as your color, because they're dealing with colorable laws. So they have a box or a set of boxes. They ask you as to whether or not you are black or African American, white, Pacific Islander, Hispanic. They ask you these things because they want you to check one of these boxes, so they convert you over to a corporation and put you up under the color of the law. These are colorable laws, and I hope that you follow me, and you probably won't follow me, but I'm still going to give out this information because I was requested to. So, yes, you are a corporate fiction. You've been converted over to a corporation. And according to law and legalese, which is the language that they use in the courts, when you go, I don't care if it's traffic, child support, whatever you're dealing with, they deal in a language. They get you through a language called legalese. And in the language of legalese, when a corporation is actually looked at as a person, you see, to you in normal language, we look at a person as a flesh and blood individual. Like, he's like me, I'm a person. But no, not according to the law. Not according to the law. See, according to the law, a corporation is a person. A corporation is a person. And I want you to think on that. So anytime they address you in the courts, they're looking at you as a corporation. This is why they ask you for identification, ID. They ask you for ID, and when you give them the ID, it's in all capital letters. Your identification is in all capital letters. They ask you for a driver's license. They ask you for a state ID. They ask you for some form of ID to gain jurisdiction over you. When you give them the ID, you're giving them jurisdiction. You're acknowledging the fact that yes, I am a corporation. Here is my ID. You see? So this is what, they are not going to teach you, and they're not going to teach people this because they want to keep people ignorant so that they can keep collecting through these traffic courts. And they do most of their collections through traffic courts, child support, and things of that nature. And I'm not saying that a person shouldn't take care of their children, and I'm not saying that a person should just drive recklessly and break the law, but what I am saying is that you have to be intelligent and know the law and know what they're doing to you, and know how to get out of this situation if you are to become independent, sovereign, and a free thinking person. Because most people go to court and have no idea what is going on. They have no idea what is going on. And you're giving the police officer jurisdiction over you even when they pull you over. Before you even get into court, you're giving them jurisdiction. When they ask you certain things, they ask you your name. When you give them your ID, they ask you, usually, is this you? They always ask you that. When they pull you over, you give them your ID, just pay attention to what they say, and they'll ask you, sir or ma'am, is this you? And you say yes. As soon as you say yes, this is you, boom, you're giving them jurisdiction. You're giving them jurisdiction over a corporate party, because your ID, your birth certificate, your social security card makes you into a corporation. When you deal with securities, this is dealt with in the investment world. A security is a form of an investment. So social security, believe it or not, is monies that was given to these private corporations based upon your birth, as to where they take out a loan on every single individual. They get a certain amount of money through a loan, and they invest this money on international markets, international stock markets. They invest the money that is issued to them based on your social security number. They invest this money onto the international stock market. This is what the governments do. And the reason why is because they issued this corporation to you through their corporation. See, government is a corporation. So when you play the corporate game, this is what you're doing. You're playing the corporate game. When you get into this whole thing of sovereignty versus being a free thinking being versus being a controlled slave victim of a corporation. When you go to a job, you're called an employee. It's a reason for that. You're called an employee. The reason why you're called an employee is because employee, according to legalese, means servant, slave. You see? So an employee is giving their services over to another corporation, and they can only contract with other corporations. This is the only way that they can contract. Now, there are remedies and ways to get out of this corporate game that government has set up. And but the first way to get out of it is to understand and to educate yourself on what is going on. Before you can even think about getting out of the corporate game, you have to educate yourself on what is going on. You educate yourself by studying the Constitution of your state and the Constitution of the United States of America. You study the Constitution, because in the Constitution you'll find out all the laws come from Constitution. They cannot pass a law unless it coincides with Constitution. The Constitution is the highest law of the land. So study the Constitution in order for you to get out of this situation. And then study and learn about the UCCs and corporations. And do your research. It's going to take you years to really understand this information. Calling yourself a Moor and calling yourself a sovereign does not make you free. It's the knowledge, having the knowledge of the law, that frees you. And that's what you must first do. Now, I offer research material on my website, up under the products aspect of my website, which is www.13, the number, signs.astrology.com. I offer research pertaining to what I'm talking about here on sovereignty. I have over 300 pages of research that I offer on my website, and this is a great way for you to begin the journey of reclaiming your sovereignty. But most people, they're not going to become sovereign because they set up these privileges and they make it convenient for you to basically give over your flesh and blood entity over to this corporate game, is what I call it. That they make it convenient by giving you a driver's license, by giving you certain privileges, because that's what they are, they're privileges. They're giving you certain privileges to make it convenient for you to join this matrix. The matrix is based on you giving over your sovereignty. That's what it's all based on. It's based on you giving over your sovereignty, and most people aren't going to be able to understand how to break free from the control of the matrix because they are addicted and enslaved to the convenience that the matrix is giving them. And they feel like it's right. They're caught up into a moral situation where they feel like it's right to pay taxes. See, they make this like a moral thing. It's not about right or wrong. It's about knowing the law. And most people don't know the law. And ignorance of the law is no excuse. So in order for you to get out of this situation, you have to first know the law. And joining a group of tax protesters and all these other things are not going to get you out of that situation. That's going to get you locked up. Joining and becoming a tax protester. And it's a reason for that. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but this is how Wesley Snipes and other people have gotten caught up and got locked up because they were protesters. You never protest a thing. You are what you are. And according to the highest universal laws, as I started out in this video, you are a flesh and blood being, and you are entitled to have certain rights predicated upon the Constitution. But you cannot claim those constitutional rights in maritime admiralty courts. So you must first understand the law and then first know which court or which court not to go to address certain ills that you have partaken in certain the government, certain aggressions and government attacks that have been placed upon you. You cannot address these things in the wrong court. So you have to know which court to go to. So, I mean, the corporate game is the main thing, though. I mean, it's like you've been converted over to a corporation through your birth certificate, through your driver's license, or your state ID, and your social security cards. And notice that all of these documents are in all capital letters because that is, according to legalese, the means and method as to how they trick you and enslave you in this matrix through the corporations. So, for more information, as I said, visit my website. I offer research materials on this. But that's going to do it for me as far as my views on sovereignty and my views on the corporate game. Hope you learned something from this video. Until we meet again, peace and love.